Good morning. Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction, and thanks to CommsDay for hosting another great conference. I'd like to echo the acknowledgements made by the previous speakers of our First Nations communities as we embark on 2 days of conversations on regional and remote connectivity. And as we kick off this conference, I'd like to reflect on a vision that Gavin touched on earlier, the vision that the Minister for Communications, Michelle Rollinson, put forward at the RadComs conference last October, the vision for Australia to be the most connected continent on Earth. The goal is clear. People should be able to communicate when they want, where they want, over whatever devices they want. And as citizen needs change and the ways in which we can use technology expand, we need to respond through providing more capacity, reliability, coverage and choice. So today I would like to discuss two things. Firstly, why nationwide connectivity is fundamentally important to our future as a nation. And secondly, how we can get there by avoiding fragmented, platform-led thinking and instead embracing holistic, nation-led thinking. But first, since I'm standing between you and coffee, I will torture you with an analogy on trams. So I was helping my son recently with a school project. He's in 5th grade. I don't know how we ever did school projects before Wikipedia, by the way. But I was surprised to learn that Sydney used to have one of the biggest tram networks in the world. Did you know that in 1945 there were 405 million passenger trips taken on the 291 kilometres of tracks which comprised the Sydney tram network? It was a really important part of a multimodal transport system until we ripped up the tracks in the 1960s. So at this point, I'll resist the temptation to share with you everything I have learned about trams, but I will come back later to why this is a good illustration for why we need to think more expansively about the future of connectivity. But before I dive in, I'll just spend 2 minutes explaining who is BAI Communications, for those of you that do not know our history. BAI was established in Australia with the privatisation of the National Broadcast Network, which provides TV and radio services throughout the whole country. BAI managed a significant program of rollout of the new services for digital television, which transformed the old analogue television services to digital, and that enabled the release of the 700 megahertz spectrum in 2013. Today, we provide a broadcast network as a service to our customers, including ABC, SBS, Southern Cross Austereo, where we design, build, own and operate all of the passive and the active infrastructure and network elements for both TV and radio, and our networks reach over 99% of the population. We also operate and manage the New South Wales Public Safety Network on behalf of the New South Wales Telco Authority. That network provides P25 connectivity for police, fire, ambulance and other emergency services organisations, and is a really important part of what we do and why we exist. But over the last decade, BAI also established a significant international business, and that's focused on providing shared networks for cellular and fibre. We rolled out connectivity across the New York subway system. We're currently in the process of establishing a citywide connectivity project in London, which includes 4G, 5G and public safety system coverage for the London Underground. We build shared networks everywhere. For example, stadiums, campuses, defence bases. We have a holistic smart city program in partnership with the City of Sunderland and a shared 5G network rollout underway in the City of Rome. We also have a fast-growing private networks business in Europe, which we are looking forward to replicating here in Australia following our successful application for 3.8 gigahertz spectrum. And our international business has grown so significantly, it's now a separate sister company operating under its own brand, Bolder Networks, in the Northern Hemisphere. We have common shareholders, with the majority owner being CPPIB, who have over $700 billion invested in infrastructure in Australia and all around the world. And because of the breadth of our involvement across broadcast and critical communications and telco networks, we tend to think very broadly about connectivity and the ways in which various platforms and technologies come together and intersect to provide outcomes for communities and for government. We know that individual citizens and therefore communities need connectivity to communicate, stay informed and entertained as they live, work, play and travel. We know from canvassing the connectivity of experience of those citizens in regional and remote areas, as the Regional Telecommunications Review has just done, reveals that there are many gaps and challenges to solve. My hesitation with framing solutions from a citizen perspective is that we may make decisions incrementally. For example, what is the benefit of providing mobile connectivity or localised broadcast services to a community of 250 people, or 1,000 people, or 5,000 people? How do we weigh the investment required to establish infrastructure and operate services over the long term with the benefits to those communities? Let me invite you to think about this from a nation-led perspective, looking at the outcomes we can achieve collectively as a nation from having comprehensive connectivity. Some of the earlier speakers have touched on these. There are three broad benefits to having connectivity. The first is economic. Connectivity can be a key driver of growth for our nation. The Deloitte Access Economic Study that was commissioned by AMTA in 2022 quantified that 5G alone would add between $67 and $94 billion to the Australian economy. And PwC estimates the cumulative benefit at around $230 billion by 2030. Technology underpinned by connectivity is a critical enabler in facing our productivity challenge and increasing our international competitiveness. The Productivity Commission's 5-year report in 2023 called out the need for digital infrastructure investment, particularly in regional and remote Australia. And of course, we're all very aware of the social impact that connectivity provides, from social inclusion to delivery of health, education and other services. Good Things Australia has quantified the benefit of overcoming digital exclusion in Australia. They estimate the benefits of nearly $500 million annually. But what is more difficult to quantify is the value of local Australian content in sustaining national culture and identity, and also the ability of public policy makers and shapers to engage with citizens from a socio-political perspective. And of course, in recent years, the safety imperatives of connectivity have become undeniably important. As the country has faced droughts, floods, cyclones, fires, connectivity is critical in disaster management to both inform our communities and coordinate emergency services response prior to, during and after a disaster event. And all of this is why being the most connected continent on Earth is a great shared vision for us to have. So how do we get there? Firstly, let's look at the key ingredients for great connectivity. We want networks that are ubiquitous, networks that have the coverage and the capacity to serve national needs across both our fixed and mobile uses of technology. We want networks that are resilient and reliable. We need them to work when we want them. One way to achieve this is in making individual networks more robust. For example, the $26 million Broadcast Resilience Program that BAI is currently deploying, which was funded by the federal government with a co-contribution from BAI. Another way to achieve resilience is by ensuring we have multiple platforms or networks which provide choice and redundancy. And of course, networks must be accessible. They need to be easy for consumers to access in an affordable way. Often affordability is directly correlated with choice, and I think this is another reason that choice should be a dual policy objective that sits alongside extension of coverage. And lastly, networks must be efficient. They should be cost effective to establish and to operate. In BAI's experience, the best way to achieve efficiency is to share as much infrastructure as possible and to deploy and operate at scale. An excellent example is the implementation of the cellular and public safety networks in the New York and London subways I mentioned earlier, using shared networks and public-private partnership models to establish efficient, shared and future-ready networks. As we know in Australia, there cannot be one network to rule them all. We have today a rich tapestry of platforms which all have different relative strengths and limitations. And so if we're judging on ubiquity, efficiency and affordability of coverage and consumer access, then you can't go past good old broadcast radio. AM radio has key limitations, obviously, being a one-way technology, and let's face it, it's not very fashionable being a really old technology. But it covers nearly 1 million more square kilometres than the biggest mobile network, and it's incredibly reliable. It has proven in recent years to be an invaluable way of communicating with communities in disasters, particularly when the power is out and other device receivers are not available and not working. It is literally life-saving. At BAI, we want mobile networks to catch up and surpass AM radio coverage. We want satellite networks to successfully serve the whole continent because we believe in the value of connectivity. But we also believe that terrestrial networks will play a really important role into the future as they maximise our sovereign capability, choice and resilience. And for our regional communities, it's even more important to think holistically about connectivity options. In highly populated urban environments, you can get away with just 5G. It can serve most of our domestic needs, unless you or your 5th grader kid is a gamer, which mine is. We have a choice of service providers. Our enterprise locations are well served by fibre. But compare this to the people that live or travel outside of those urban areas, living out at a farm out at Burrawa, for example, between here and Cowra, or my parents on their farm at Upper Bowman, which is northwest of Gloucester in New South Wales. There is absolutely no mobile coverage there, so you need to also invest in a fixed broadband solution. And you now have a choice between NBN, Sky Muster and emerging LeoSat providers, which is great. But what happens when you need to leave the farmhouse? To round up the livestock, to fix the fences? How do you communicate with others or harness technology to drive automation in your farm operations? How do you or your local emergency services personnel communicate in a disaster situation? To be the most connected continent on Earth, networks and the critical enablers such as spectrum and investment, both public and private, need to stay one step ahead of these needs. So, how do we come together to deliver on this vision? What do we need to do differently? To achieve a truly nation-led connectivity model, government and industry must work together. For government, it's developing policy and regulatory settings that encourage efficient investment, moving away from fragmented short-term programs and implementing centrally coordinated programs of scale. It's carefully weighing the role that efficient, effective use of spectrum plays in ensuring we sustain the right mix of platforms into the future and to encourage those platforms to evolve and improve. We need government to lead, orchestrate and facilitate the evolution of networks, taking a nation-led approach. And governments at all levels should consider how various sources of funding can be aggregated and used to drive targeted, meaningful improvement in the connectivity landscape. To me, this means further aggregation of state and federal funding towards more holistic, targeted programs. And for industry, I echo the comments made earlier by Gavin and Anna. We need to harness the power of partnerships to establish efficient programs for investment, to evolve our networks and create new ones. As Michael just noted, the places that most need resilient infrastructure are often the most difficult places to deliver it. We need to come together to address and seek support on issues which are impeding our ability to evolve the networks for the future. We should compete vigorously in the market, but collaborate on nationwide initiatives. We see this industry as an ecosystem where many parties can bring strengths and play a valuable part in tomorrow's connectivity landscape. And I think we're starting from a position of strength here. We have bipartisan government support for connectivity improvement. We have strong local industries in broadcast and telco, and I hope an emerging collaboration on public safety. We are people who are early adopters of technology in all its forms, and I believe will accelerate our use of technology, which will drive growth and productivity. So finally, back to trams. I'm sure you're all super excited to learn more. I can see you all on the edge of your seats, although that's probably waiting for coffee. You'll recall the 405 million passenger trips. So what was the population of Sydney at the time? It was around 1.5 million. So most people were taking trams most of the time. Why then did we get rid of them around 1961? Well, because cars were becoming more popular and more accessible. When those tracks were removed, the experience of the car users was fantastic. All that road freed up for only 400,000 cars. But the number of cars grew to about 4 million by 2020. The experience now, not so great. Time to bring back the trams, or we'll call it light rail now. But the cost to rebuild that, $2.1 billion for the 12 kilometres we have built so far to replace the 291 kilometres of the old tram network. My point is this: in planning for the future of connectivity, let's think multimodal, let's think multi-platform. Because when new and old and emerging technologies work together, we can deliver capacity, reliability, coverage, and choice. The goal is that people across Australia should be able to communicate when they want, where they want, over whatever devices they want. They should be able to access all platforms, whether it is the traditional free-to-consumer TV and radio networks, fixed broadband, mobile connectivity, or high bandwidth, low latency connectivity for industrial applications. The choices we make today will define Australia's connectivity future. And if we embrace a nation-led, multi-platform approach, we don't just connect communities, we build a stronger nation. Thank you.